Disruption, innovation, how will it affect the labour market? As I mentioned before, I've been working in and around autonomy for about 5 years now, regulatory level, flag state level, and looking at how regulations might be needed. And at the International Maritime Organization, we're starting to see those conversations happen, and the regulations are starting to be developed and be discussed by the technical experts around the world. But as I mentioned, we have a labour maritime workforce which perhaps there have been concerns, and as we heard earlier from the previous panels, that there might be concerns, and how do we address that? And so with this wonderful panel that we have here today of crew managers, ship operators, a member from the union, and also someone working heavily in the analysis work and the research projects that we're seeing with this coming through, hopefully we can give you more of a flavour. And as I saw on LinkedIn recently, there's a lot of negative connotations with autonomy and future technologies. Let's hopefully try and produce more of a positive, an open, reflective, and collaborative framework for people to move forward. So really, my first question to all of you, and what I'm going to do in the room, we've been utilizing Slido, and I'm going to try an experiment. We're going to look to put together a word cloud which we can take away after this event to help inform us of how this role is changing. And so if you're more than willing to take the QR code to the screen, in panel 4, you'll see a question that should pop up on the screen about, in your opinion, what do you believe to be the biggest technology disruption facing the maritime industry today, and how is it affecting the labour force? And that's the first question that I'm going to go with to my panel. So first, if I can, George, in your opinion, what is the biggest technology disruption facing the maritime industry today, and how do you think that might affect the labour force? So starting with a really easy question for you.
Well, looking to the recent couple of decades, I would say, in my opinion, it's internet on board, because it has helped to convert a captain and the crew from ship operators to partial secretaries and administration staff. I'm putting aside the need for connectivity with their families and their friends, but I believe that is the biggest disruption that we have faced over the last 2 decades.
And I would completely agree. As a former seafarer, I think, as we heard earlier today, this idea of an admin officer, so much paperwork. And actually, as I tried to explain to people with digitalization, and from January 2024, the single window will become further into effect, where throughout the entire maritime chain, we'll start to see, hopefully, that administrative burden from a paper perspective reduced to hopefully ease that, so they can focus on the technical jobs that they've been employed to do, actually, and to use that competency. It's great to see some words already starting to come up. And Faouzi, if I could bring you in, what are your thoughts on the biggest disruption?
Well, just, of course, to say also something different to that, I think that the technology, especially on the engineering side, is being now developing a bit faster than our training capabilities. So we see a lot of modern engines, a lot of automation, a lot of electronics, whereas the education of our engine officers does not seem always to be catching up with these developments. And we've seen also some other challenges when it comes to digitalizing what used to be very classic before. Is not that definitely new. ECDIS is not new. It's been many years already. However, ECDIS is only one step, and perhaps would be more digital equipment on board, which also needs a lot of training, a lot of familiarization. And the last thing I would like to add, that the alternative fuels are also coming with a lot of challenges, so which perhaps I think we're going to discuss a bit more during this panel. But it's definitely not from technology side, but from operational and innovation side, it is very challenging.
Absolutely, and I agree. And one of the things that I heard earlier from the Voice of the Seafarers panel, actually, was the idea that manufacturers who are developing these new technologies, perhaps as part of the package that they provide to the vessel operators and the ships, is that ability to actually provide some introductory training to the crews on board. A very small step that might actually make quite a big impact, I think, personally. That's my opinion. Jackie, is it okay for you to come in on this question?
The same question about the biggest, yes. So
absolutely.
first I just want to say that I've been around 20 years plus in the maritime industry, not saying what the plus is because I don't date myself too much, but I've been to maritime conferences, and conferences usually are just about the ships. And this one, and I want to thank IMEC, and I want to thank the previous panels for it being focused on the human side of it, giving the seafarers a voice. So that's really interesting. I think the first time in 20 years that I've actually been in a conference where the focus has been very much so on the seafarers. To the question about the biggest technology disruption, I don't think there's just one single type of technology disruption. I think what's going to be challenging is the fact that we're not necessarily setting the agenda. Who's setting the agenda is that you're having, and it goes hand in hand with talking about green shipping, talking about the changes that are going to be required from an environmental perspective that's going to force a change that we might not be prepared for. And then the other challenge is that tech companies most likely are more setting the agenda than we are. And I think that we need to be the ones being more vocal about what's needed to enhance the work of the seafarers and not replace.
I think that's a really good point that you just mentioned at the end. The flooding and the technology, the pace actually, is very difficult to keep up with. And the regulators, as have always been kind of arguably explained to be the problem because they can't develop these regulations quick enough. We need to perhaps find new strategies and new solutions to support that whilst that regulation is trying to catch up. So I think that's a really interesting point. And Christoph, if I can bring you in as well, your thoughts?
Yeah, you're allowed to do that. It's of course hard to pick something at the end of the day, but what I would say, and leaving out decarbonization because I think that's a separate topic for itself, is that we have one major change, and that's the whole connectivity thing, and that's actually not a disruption, but a baseline technology that's going on. And what is actually happening is, I mean, the word autonomous ships is quite popular nowadays. Actually, all this autonomous ship technology is making ships less autonomous. And I might want to shortly elaborate. If we think about the fact when shipping became back in the 18th century, we had the telegraph, and that was it. So basically, a ship owner was trusting a crew that they can sail with their ship somewhere, and there was no influence at all. And what is happening within the last decade already is by this increasing connectivity. And yes, I know internet is still an issue for some seafarers and some vessels, but also on the front runners of technologies and in terms of shipping, if we look for ferries or cruise liners, for example, we see more and more integration of the ship with land-based offices. And that's something that is affecting also the work and the job profiles nowadays, and that's now continuing further also in this idea of remote controlled, autonomous, unmanned, however you want to call it, shipping. But I think that's one of the main fundamental changes. That's also the way how seafarers are behaving either on board or on shore, because traditionally, I would say, if you speak with somebody 50, 60 years ago, you were not really working in a team with the shore-based entities, at least not in your daily operation. And that's something that is more and more changing at the moment and will become the new norm.
No, and I think that's a really good point. As I mentioned, with the industries coming new to the maritime industry, the need for that conversation and collaboration grows even more. And we talked about the disruptors and the companies that are coming through, but there is a huge amount of history with maritime and a huge amount of technical expertise. The knowledge partnership can be shared both ways, and I think that needs to be remembered because the maritime industry is very unique to other transport sectors, and sometimes that's often forgotten, especially when some companies that are looking to disrupt come to the market. And just taking a bit of a different tact, and apologies, Faouzi and George, if I put you a little bit on the spotlight. But we've heard earlier today people talking about what we can do and what has been done. And I'm interested to know from your perspective, and we'll start with you, Faouzi, what has your company been looking to implement, or what new technologies have you been testing, researching, trying for the crews of your vessels?
Well, I mean, let me start also saying, but I believe that technology is there to help us. So technology is not a threat, it's an opportunity. And technology is not there to replace seafarers, even though some manpower might be less needed on the ship and more manpower might be needed ashore. So today in our company, for example, we have a performance optimization control room, which is there to help the voyage, to assist the master and the chief engineer by giving recommendations on the routing, weather recommendation, to make the voyage more economical, managing the bunker consumption. Efficiency is the word, and performance. It doesn't mean that captains are not capable to do that by their own, but they do not have enough technology or enough software or enough assistance and data on board to make all the right decisions. Still today, and I think it will be the same case as long as there is a captain on the ship, a human being, or even AI one day, the captain still has to make some decisions on her or his own.
And they're very tough decisions.
Very tough
These are very
decisions.
important decisions that a mariner or an engineer might need to make, which effectively could be hugely important to the voyage itself and the cargo on board.
Exactly, but look at how the technology is helping a lot on board. Look at the plant maintenance systems, which are becoming more and more smart and user-friendly, and they really help people to manage their jobs, to work even less by knowing when to do what. Look at the software for chart management. Look at the software for voyage planning. Look at the software for crew planning. So today the captain has full visibility of what is being done in the crewing department. So he can see what crew are planning to come, what is the next lineup. He can make commands on that, and all the information, all the exchange is going live between the ship and the office. So to add to what George said initially, that definitely comes with a cost, that the captain of today is more involved in administration. So maybe the captain previously or historically was more of a leader, today more of a manager.
Yes.
That is another topic about soft skills and management styles and so on, but we can pick up later if you wish.
No, I appreciate that, and hopefully I think the words you're trying to say, and you certainly alluded to throughout that conversation, was that the captains and the chief engineers should not be afraid of this optimization, and you know, that was mentioned earlier, but actually this is there to assist and to help. And perhaps something that perhaps we could take as a small step is to ensure that that education of this new technology that's coming in gets to those seafarers so that they understand what is the actual benefit of these technologies to support their day-to-day lives, to improve, hopefully, their well-being on board and actually their job day-to-day. George, any thoughts to come in on that same kind of theme?
When somebody designs a product, it depends on whom they consider the end user. When you're a company, you want to sell your product, your end user is the buyer, which is the company ashore. But technically, the end user, the data entry points are on board the vessel. So if you don't take this into account, it's going to be much more difficult to implement, and you will have higher level of rejection from the crew being forced to use a system which is not, at the end of the day, user-friendly. So for me, the future is that we design the products based on how they will be used on board. It's good, and I agree with Faouzi that we are able to assist, but usually we need data entries from the vessel, which is the crew. And if they are not comfortable doing so, then it will make our job in the office more complicated, and it will create friction between office and shore.
Yeah, so basically what I'm hearing here is they need, the crews and the experts and people ashore need to be involved in this conversation as this technology is being developed. If they're not part of that conversation, they may feel threatened. That feeling of being isolated or not being part of it, that's a really cool part of this whole technology coming through at such an accelerated pace. That fear factor, as we heard earlier, can really make people feel, oh, I'm under threat. There is a potential discussion on replacement, which from my perspective and what I've seen with the technology developments is not the case. So thank you very much. That was really interesting points. Now, Jackie, I have a question dedicated to yourself. What role can unions play in ensuring that workers are not displaced by new technologies in the maritime industry?
Well, I don't think they're going to be displaced, first and foremost. You know, technology is not something that unions or seafarers or workers generally are worried about any more than anyone else. We all use technology. We all have smartphones. You know, we all have cars that probably have sensors or cameras. We use Google to get from A to B. So it's not as if we're afraid. What is the union's concern is that they're properly educated and skilled to be able to understand the technology. I just learned that AirPlay, that I can from my phone stream something and then project it onto my television. That's amazing, never knew that. But if you taught me how to do it, then I'm confident that I can do it next time I get to some place and want to AirPlay onto another television. The seafarers just want to be sure that they know what they're going to, how that software, how that technology works, and that they are properly skilled to be able to handle it.
It's that message on education, isn't it? It's that piece that they are there a day and night, 24/7, 7 days a week, ensuring that cargo travels around the world, even throughout the COVID disruption, still providing the goods that sit to your table or you take from the supermarket day to day. They need to be involved in this conversation. The technology is going to be affecting the seafarers like myself and the others that have been out there working. And so they should be part of that conversation to understand how to utilize it, like you mentioned with putting up your screen on the TV, you know, things like that.
AirPlay,
small
Rob,
things.
have you tried it?
Yes, I have, yeah, absolutely, yeah. And Christoph, if I can come to you just with a slightly different twist. Talking about automation and implementing new technologies, how can companies balance that need to ensure that jobs are still maintained and that there is job security for workers in this industry? And I'm sure we've discussed many times on that kind of conference trail in the last couple of years.
Yeah. I think at the end of the day, it's very much technology, as already mentioned. It's not about replacing seafarers or workers. It's, yes, it's a change in certain tasks, but therefore other tasks are coming up. It's not specifically for maritime, but I think there's a study, meanwhile, about robotics in general, because if you spoke about factories, they also every time had the risk in the 70s, 80s that we are replacing all workers. And I think if you look at it overall, we have meanwhile generated more jobs by robotic technologies than we have lost in the classical factory things. So yes, there's a certain shift in the knowledge needs and in the tasks that we are having. And there is some kind of evolution, but actually we had that evolution in all areas, also in the maritime over the past. Yeah, I mean, I don't know, in 5,000 years ago, we need to know how to row boats, yeah? Then we need to know how to sail boats, then how to operate steam engines and now other engines, and the same is true at some time for navigation and other technologies. So they need to be involved, and specifically also with the autonomy part, there's this concept of remote control centers coming up meanwhile very actively. We also already see them in operation for coastal shipping and also specifically for inland shipping. And that's actually a place where I think there will also be room for the classical role of seafarers and good seamanship skills, even though the setup might be a bit different. Not necessarily bad than before. Yeah, tax reductions might be a little different thing on the income thing, but might be more inclusive. You could be closer to the family. So there's a certain trade-off, and I think one have to be open for this kind of evolution that's happening. And it's not about crossing out someone's knowledge or need completely.
I completely agree, and I think it was touched upon earlier today, but like you mentioned, there's a new wave of technologies that are coming that, in my opinion, will help eliminate, potentially at sea, dull, dirty, dangerous jobs. It was talked about yesterday, earlier today by Francesco, but also the idea that the opportunities for perhaps very experienced people that perhaps have maybe had an incident or an accident at sea, and perhaps, as I'm sure Natalie mentioned, there's disabilities that perhaps have forced people away from their experience at sea, and a wealth of knowledge that can be shared. Perhaps there's an opportunity with remote operation in shoreside infrastructure to create a pathway where there is an opportunity for them to continue sharing that skill and that historical traditional knowledge that they had previously. If you want to come in again.
If you can maybe add one specific example, it's not directly seafarers, but we are currently working very much in the area of pilotage. And I know remote pilotage is a topic where half of the pilots directly leave the room, if you say so, because there are certain fears around that. But at the end of the day, what we are looking into there is we want to find a way how they can execute their task in supporting the vessel without going there. Because actually nobody is paying the pilot that he's capable to climb up a ladder in harsh weather conditions. It's about the fact that he has local knowledge in a certain area and can ensure safety, and the master in that area. And I think at least already in the Northern Sea, we had 3 major pilotage accidents this year, yes. 2 deaths, 1 severely injured people. So there's meanwhile new technology out there. And we are looking into the fact how can we still perform, for example, those kind of tasks by better connectivity without putting, it's the pilot, not the seafarers on board in that case, in these dangerous situations at the end of the day.
And I completely agree, and you're absolutely right. Recently, my friend is working in the Humber as a pilot, and one of his colleagues, unfortunately, tragically, had incidents which involved the loss of his life. And if there are ways we can learn in order to help prevent and create more safe environments, then these should be at least trialed, tested, and had a look to see if they can be effective at preventing such dangerous occurrences. Jackie, you said you wanted to come in.
It's a little bit back to what Hans-Christoph was saying, because of, I mean, the biggest concern is the connectivity. I mean, you can have remote operations, but what do you do? And we've all been there, where you lose your internet. You lose your internet in the middle of a delicate situation, delicate operation, and you lose it. What happens then? So that's one of the things that, until we can have that stability, even if it's coastal shipping, and there's been advances in that, that is, and you could lose it in the middle of London, internet goes out for whatever reason. And then the second thing is the cybersecurity. How is that, how do you ensure that? Are we prepared for that? Because, I mean, there's people who hack are very far advanced compared to where we are.
Yes. Yeah, sorry, Christoph, come in again. Yeah, absolutely, no.
If I can comment. I mean, in terms of hacking, honestly, ships are the most easy thing you can hack nowadays. Because if you look at the navigation equipment on board, and that has nothing to do with autonomous shipping, that's so hilariously open and old infrastructure. I don't know how many navigation systems are running on Windows 7 still. So the fortunate thing is it's really annoying over a satellite connection to hack, and the connectivity for that specific part is not there. But in terms of cybersecurity, I would say there's anyhow a huge step that Maritime should take if you want to take that serious. So it seems a little bit sometimes kind of a whataboutism discussion for the autonomy. And in terms of connectivity, I think there's also one thing we need to include if we speak about real-time systems here. And there's a difference between, of course, support systems like pilotage or really shore-based control. But of course, we speak about different kinds of connectivity systems and setups than we are using privately on our phones. Yeah? And I know that we often compare that straight away, and also with Microsoft technology, but honestly, industrial systems are, of course, designed in a different way, and you can also use technology and connectivity technology in a different way that comes at a higher cost than we are used to for mobile phone, of course. And that's something where we need to balance off, but it's very much about how you design the systems at the end of the day. And that's important, of course. If we say we want to do remote control, then we don't do it over 4G mobile networks, but use something more advanced. But also those kind of systems are available. One just needs to integrate them in a proper way.
No, absolutely. And you know, in my time at the IMO when discussing automation, one of the things that was pivotal to the discussions on how we develop the right regulations and legislation was actually the idea that human-centered design is completely critical to how the development of these technologies adapt in future, that the human in the loop is still part of that conversation, as has been for thousands of years in the maritime industry. So thanks for that. And that was a quick, easy message about Windows 7 and upgrading your computer systems on board that I'm sure our members can take away.
One minor thing to the IMO, it's a minor thing, human on the loop. I think the problem is that we design all things as human in the loop systems, and that's how we generate the overload. We have a lot of information and then still rely on the human. To a certain degree, it's called, I think, monitoring navigator nowadays, and we should trust, at least for some tasks, that we go that step that he's on the loop and no longer in the loop, because I think that causes some of the problems that we are having at the moment.
Could I just ask, what's the difference between on the loop and in the loop?
In the loop is you're the direct decision making and you're totally relying on the human to be available all the time to make those. While on the loop is more the monitoring persons. Let me put it like that. It's a little bit like the manager. So you're controlling, of course, what the system is doing, but the system has also a certain capability to act further even if you're not permanently watching on it. And I think that's a big design difference that's often overlooked.
And I appreciate that. And Jackie, for asking the question that I was probably just about to ask as well. So appreciate that. And just if I can pivot ever so slightly, this conference, there's been a lot of talk about technologies, and I'd like to bring it back to the training aspect. Training is absolutely vital. If I can quickly go across each of our panel members, George, what kind of steps could we potentially take now and effective action now to ensure that the seafarers of today, but also of the future, as we saw some of those cadets from the Philippines that are here and also from Ukraine, what steps could we take now to ensure that our seafarers are ready for the next 30 years?
Ask them if they are.
Simple question. Being involved in the industry as they are, they see how these are developing.
We need them to be informed and trained, but they know best what their needs are. I'm not going to implement something based on my knowledge, because I use a computer on a daily basis. Some of them may not.
Simple. Faouzi, same question.
Yeah, I will be less simple than George. Well, let me start from this. Do you know how many type of engines are there in the industry? How many models of ballast water treatment systems, exhaust gas cleaning systems, ECDIS?
I could tell probably ECDIS, but the other ones I can't possibly claim to be an expert.
I mean, definitely the number is smaller than ECDIS. However, the training is 5 times bigger, yeah. So unfortunately, seafarers, we see that there's more and more specialization. We talk about tankers, for example, which makes sense. That's on STCW already. However, we go even more on the size. You know, you have people for VLCC, you have people for Aframax, and you have this and that. And this now goes for engineers, the guys for MAN-ME, MEB, MEC, then Wärtsilä, then, you know, WinGD, and so on and so forth. So more and more trainings. And to have a universal officer today is a guy who will have to spend months of training, and he or she will have to do it again within a few years because there is some refresher requirement and so on. My concerns here, being in a manager position too. First, there is a void of regulation, so everyone can make his own interpretation. Do I really need to have a maker's approved training because this is new technology, because it's a new engine, and we can only trust the maker, whom obviously and simply we think that he knows better what he produced, but not necessarily makers are training expert.
And is it fit for purpose?
Exactly, is it fit for purpose? We don't know, we just trust because we have the logo there. And the second point is, when do we actually start thinking about training? Is it before building this new engine or after building it? And it's not only built, it's already there on the ships, and ships being delivered, and there is no training material available which makes sense. So I think we have to reconsider a bit also the regulation, how fast they are developing. Look at STCW, it's, I mean, with all respect to everyone involved in STCW, but the revisions are dramatically slow and very inefficient and coming too late. I don't understand personally what stops IMO from making amendments for making circulars, resolutions, whatever, which can catch up with the technology and put regulations in place, guidance in place to help the industry. So there are a lot of questions, Rob, around that. And I feel the challenge for us as managers, for ship owners, for the seafarers, and obviously for the unions as well, because we are all under that pressure.
We only know what we know.
Yeah.
And actually, like we said before, that collaboration of getting the right people in the room to discuss those things, to find the right solutions, is the way forward. And yes, I do completely understand that the IMO process at times can be considered slow, and I take that. I completely agree to some extent. And Jackie, if I can come to you on that as well, about what small steps or what steps could we potentially take, in the short term to help make this ecosystem better in the long term.
How short is your short term? When you get older, the short term becomes longer term compared to younger people who are more impatient as they should be. I think first and foremost, the difficulty with this is that we really don't know, because everything is like Hans-Christoph said, that decarbonization is something different than the technology that he's talking about. But at the same time, you need new technology to be able to deal with the reduction in emissions, and that's going to be put upon us, while the other technology is like, what do we need from new technology? Why are we doing that? Is it because it's interesting and makes it more efficient or makes it safer? There has to be a reason why we would be wanting to introduce new technology. But when it comes to decarbonization, that technology is going to be forced upon us in a completely different way. But we don't know what it's going to be completely. So how do you prepare them? I mean, there has to be, so regulations have to ensure that there is funding, and it's not always left up to the employers, and it's definitely not left up to the seafarers to upskill and reskill to be able to deal with that technology. Now, if it's a levy from flag states, port states that are recipients of the cargo, how they want to deal with it, that's a different matter. But there has to be money in so that there is funding so that those seafarers can get the appropriate education and training to deal with the technology.
Perfect. Thank you, Jackie. And finally, Christoph, I can come in briefly.
Yeah. I think there's one issue, because you also referred to the training. And let me stress, training is of course important, and we need to do that to also get the seafarers up the way for this technology evolution. But actually, specifically in maritime, I would say there's one step missing at the moment, and that is also a little bit like you mentioned, technology is forced upon us. Yeah? There's a lot of technology happening, and specifically if we speak about automation technology, at the end of the day, all this innovation is a combination of technology and the operations and the processes at the end of the day. And my observation over the last 10, 15 years is that we do a lot in the technology progress, but we never really put so much time in parallel in how the operation and the processes can do properly working in that development phase already. It's often like that, then you have the product ready, then it's certified, and then you roll it out exactly as it is, yeah? And if one might have asked somebody before or did a little bit of analysis, one would have found out that another process or another interaction would be a bit better. And I think that's maybe one of the things I like to stress, because we have, specifically in the research domain, a lot of those capabilities. I know in the STM project, we once used this European Maritime Simulator Network, where we did do trials of prototyping software before, or at least it was planned to do like that. It didn't work as intended, because the makers also had own intentions. But at the end of the day, I think that's something that we definitively need to go forward with, because otherwise we're just doing the technology development and then just come up with the training for technology that is there. And yes, the training is important, but if we would do a combination of technology and operational development, find a good way how that interacts with, together, and then start with the training development, that would be a bit more efficient. But I know it's an additional step in between that we are not used to do at the moment, even though it might have long-term benefits.
And I think it's absolutely vital. So I couldn't agree more. And as I've been made aware of time, I'll just try and summarize those 4 points. Ask the seafarers. They're there every day. They're working with these new technologies that are coming in. They have insights that we should absolutely learn from, their expertise. Also, when do we think about training? What part of that life cycle? And I think the agreement in the room is start considering the design of that before the technologies are being developed, and involve the right people at the right time to ensure that the crews of the people working in the industry will be ready when that technology arrives. Funding created to upskill should be absolutely vital. The entire process in the first place, that funding is allocated to everybody so that the process is smooth, the transition is smooth. And then lastly, just a consideration on the operational and the practical side, actually how it looks like on the vessel, not the conferences that are explaining the technologies that are coming to scare everyone away. Actually how on board that is implemented, I think is really crucial. So I just want to have a quick look. We've had 45 participants and someone is eagerly typing away now, so that'll be 46 in a moment. Connectivity, one of the biggest items discussed. Digitizing cash to master, decarbonization as I'm sure we expected. Cybersecurity, a big message. Artificial intelligence, I don't know how many of you are aware of ChatGPT, but that area of the world right now is only going to be growing at a frightening pace. So things to consider, and also artificial intelligence. And we've been utilizing Slido, but what I want to do now is just open the floor to anyone in the room that wishes to ask an actual question. Casti, Dan, just at the front here.
This is something the cadets always ask me. I put it up there. They said with GMDSS, we lost the radio officer. With UMS, we lost a lot of engine staff. What's going to happen to the cadet in the future? Because at one side, the whole panel said that new technology doesn't mean to say loss of jobs, but we've seen it. GMDSS, no more radio officer. UMS, reduced the amount of engine staff. So as more and more intelligence comes on the ship, the human being gets displaced. How do we answer the cadet?
I don't really think it's a threat. I've been on board when I've seen the first radio officer leaving with no comeback. Yeah, and it was the first GMDSS on board, and we had very little training about it. I think the way forward is, as I mentioned before, to have people knowing more than just one thing. So you have 1/4 engineer less, but you still have a 3rd engineer, a 2nd engineer, a chief engineer on board. So that's also a future position for a cadet. You can't start straightforward from 3rd engineer, right?
There's not going to be any more 3rd engineer.
You'll still have maybe very well paid 2nd engineer. So I don't think for cadets is that the threat. Maybe the questions for the cadets, if I were a cadet today, I will ask, do I have in my curriculum, am I studying everything which I will need for the technology of tomorrow? Like we spoke about ChatGPT, do I understand what artificial intelligence is? Do I understand what all this automation is about? Because what we see of the skills of our officers today, that they need to be familiar with a lot of new things. I don't know, Capt, if you remember the first captains who got ECDIS on board.
How do you explain to a radio officer that after so many years of training to be a radio officer, you don't have a job anymore?
Many of them have been converted. Many of them have converted.
I'm not clear. I cannot convert. I trained myself for many years as a radio officer. Now suddenly GMDSS, bye-bye.
And if Casti, if I can...
It's not my question. It's a question that cadets ask me.
Yes,
But if I may, the cadet is at the best possible position because he is still learning. The cadet will evolve. Entering the market now, the vessel will be the same over the next 30 years. They will change. So the cadet is in a position that can evolve. When somebody is now a chief mate, it's going to be a bit more difficult for them to evolve over the next 20 years.
And yeah, George, I think that's an excellent point. And just one thing I wanted to mention, and I know we're really short for time, is that shipping has always evolved. Crews have always been resilient. We've seen that with the COVID disruption. And things always change. We talked about sail to steam. We talked about rowing boats, moving to some of the ultra large container ships we're seeing. Over time, things have changed and shipping has still existed. And it will always exist and it will always be necessary. However, change will always come, and that adaptation, as we're seeing now with disruptive technologies that are coming so accelerated, that we need to be prepared for that. And just a final message, and before I close, the last thing I just wanted to say is, there's a lot of finger pointing with new technologies and disruption. And actually what we need to remember, just as a takeaway, is that we're all in this together. It's a really important point, ensuring that we invest in the future, ensuring that we invest in seafarers today. We're all in this life cycle together. We're all making sure that we can keep this future going for the remaining generations that come into this wonderful career. And I think I'll probably leave it with that because I know we're really tight for time, Faouzi. But one thing I can say, I think this has created a lot of interesting discussion points. And I think maybe in the break that at some point that those discussion points can be discussed more. So I just want to thank you very much, George, Faouzi, Jackie, and Christoph. Thank you.
Thank you.